Okay. Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate you coming to Cary Grove Adventist Fellowship, the branch of Salient Lifestyle Center in the Northwest, to our presentation, our series on food as medicine. So we talked about heart disease last time. This time we will talk about diabetes, and we will have time for questions. So the question is, can we prevent and reverse diabetes? And who says yes? Yes. Okay, great, thank you. So we, believe it or not, we have evidence going back 40 years that this can happen, and even longer. But does anyone know how we diagnosed diabetes back before there were urine and blood tests? Doctors, they used to sample the urine of patients, as in drink, sip. And that's how we doctors diagnose diabetes. This is how dedicated the medical profession is. So diabetes is at the highest rate ever, even exploding, especially in the youth. So it used to be, we used to call juvenile diabetes and adult diabetes, right? Juvenile diabetes means type 1, typically without insulin. Type 2 diabetes used to be adult diabetes. And now we are seeing younger and younger ages with what's called diabesity, diabetes with a combination of obesity. And the numbers are quite shocking. It is even such that weight loss surgery is being recommended to adolescents. The fancy drugs that you may have heard of on TV for diabetes and weight loss are now being tested down to age 6 years old. And then, you may have known, if you know anyone that has severe psychiatric problems, some of those drugs cause people to gain over 50 or sometimes 100 pounds. This is even in the teenage years. So again, just to summarize, type 1 diabetes is a deficiency of insulin. Type 2 diabetes is typically a resistance to the body's own insulin. And usually these people have an excess of insulin, but even that excess may not be enough to meet the body's needs. And however, some people with type 2 diabetes require insulin. And then I'll add one more thing. Someone with type 1 diabetes with perhaps extra weight or metabolic problems may require more insulin than they would if they didn't have the metabolic problem. So this type 2 diabetes requiring insulin may be due to the toxic effect of high blood sugar damaging the pancreas, the islet cells. So there's two parts of the pancreas. The islet cells are more in the tail of the pancreas, so it's called glucotoxicity. And sometimes it's referred to as what's called beta cell burnout. And the exact mechanism is still poorly understood. So you may have seen advertised that Chinese researchers have reversed diabetes using some infusion of stem cells. Well, that is not for type 2, that is for type 1 diabetes, which is amazing. So the most amazing results I have seen with type 1 are those who need a kidney transplant. And in some cases, when they do the kidney transplant, they'll put in islet cell transplant too, pancreatic islet cell transplant. And in very rare cases, they can transplant the pancreas without the kidney. So the costs are quite staggering. These numbers are actually old already, and the costs have gone even more up. I would actually suggest to you that the cost can be $20,000 a year or higher for diabetes, because the medications can be so expensive. The medical costs, so you have, primary care, endocrine doctor, maybe a kidney specialist, maybe a cardiologist, and all those expensive drugs. So by the time you add up everything, and then we haven't even gotten to the eye. The eye disorders are quite shocking as well. Does anyone raise your hand if you know someone with blindness because of diabetes? Yes. So it can be blindness or near blindness as well. So the total cost in the US in 2012 is $245 billion. That includes $176 billion in direct medical costs and $69 billion in reduced productivity. So, and reduced productivity, imagine the person with uncontrolled diabetes who has a foot amputated and is no longer able to work, right? So that is shocking too. The disabilities can span so many aspects. Yes?
Ever done other than just the evilness of greed, which, you know, will eventually
Right.
clear it. Why it's so expensive? Why is it going up?
So the question was about why diabetes is so expensive and why it's going up. And I have to say greed is part of it. So it's American way. There is no cap on what they can charge for drugs. So let's just take the example of insulin, right? So you may have heard that the budget or what is it called, Infrastructure Act included some provision for insulin. That doesn't mean insulin's cheaper. What that means is we are all paying for it and it's cheaper to the consumer, but the cost is up. So can anyone estimate what the cost of 1 pen of insulin can be these days? Just estimate. So let me give you choices. $50, $200 to $300, or $500 to $1,000. What would be approximate cost of 1 pen of insulin? $1,000? It's actually around $300. Typically they come in a 5-pack. So a 5-pack is $1,500 already. And that's each insulin. So someone may be on 2 types of insulin. So those are expensive. Then the latest drugs for diabetes, over $1,000 a month. It is shocking. And then medical expenditures have gone up every year, right? The cost of hospital and surgery. If you've looked at a hospital bill, you know what the costs are, right? So the largest components, to break it down, hospital inpatient care, 43%. Why? Someone with diabetes requires many hospital days in inpatient care. Prescription drugs, 18%. I would argue that that's probably closer to 30 now because the costs have gone up. Whereas, let's say when I started medical school, the drugs were very cheap typically, and they were the old type of drugs, which gave a few problems, but they worked, you know, to lower blood sugars. Now today, the typical drug costs can span thousands of dollars a month because many times it's not just insulin, but many other expensive drugs. And then add to that, if someone has eye disease, diabetic retinopathy, those injections are extremely expensive. Heart disease, you know, other conditions too. So anti-diabetic agents and diabetes supplies 12%. They're actually the cheaper part. So the continuous glucose sensor, if you've heard of the one that you attach to your arm and you scan your phone, that's actually not so expensive like it used to be. It used to be much more. And then physician office visits, guess what? Our part of the medical pie is very little compared to the others. And then nursing and residential facility stays. Yeah, when I was in medical school, I remember that someone with diabetes had a recent amputation and had to go to the nursing home for a few weeks. So you can actually read on this link, the cost of diabetes. You'll receive the link. So this is just an infographic from American Diabetes Association. It's already old, but I would just highlight one aspect is the human cost, and especially those people that are from diverse backgrounds are much more likely to have diabetes. So consider that in a particular neighborhood in Chicago, which is the Englewood neighborhood, which is a more disadvantaged neighborhood, childhood obesity is about 50%. We're not even talking overweight, we're talking frank obesity. What is their future? A lot of them will be diabetic. And that, you know, there are various reasons for that. And part of the reason is what's called social determinants of health, which is more well known now, which there is no medical treatment. The treatment is societal, and it's the most difficult. So just consider this. We have a graph of 1994 versus 2015. What do you notice in this graph? Do you notice a staggering difference in the diabetes? This is within our lifetime. We in this room remember 1994 very vividly, right? And then 2015, if you look at it, it's all red, which means above 9% in many states. Now, very interestingly, there's a difference between north and south, right? And you notice that the south is much more prevalent. And you know what? Anyone remember Paula Deen and her cooking show, right? And guess what Paula Deen advertised in her later career? Diabetes medication. It was called Victoza. She was the spokesperson for that company that manufactured it for a very short time, because then there was the whole controversy I won't get into. But here is the data for U.S. food intake. So people might say, well, people are eating, less beef, less pork. But if you look at the graph on the upper right, they are replacing it with chicken. So what is the deal with chicken? There's no fiber. There's not much nutrients besides protein. There is a lot of fat. So if you may remember a hen, a chicken, let's say a roaster chicken that you get at the grocery store, from 30 years ago was kind of scrawny, wasn't it? You could remember picking up the drumstick, 2 bites, it would be done. Now it's the size of a turkey. If you think about like the size of a whole chicken that you buy at the store. So it is not lean meat anymore. And then about the sweeteners. So interestingly, yes, the total sweeteners have kind of remained constant, because the corn syrup in the 1980s has kind of replaced the cane and beet sugar. So if you buy soda in the US, and there are a lot of people that buy 2-liter bottles, a whole cart full, and would proceed to drink either half or the whole of that 2-liter bottle. So I have seen it. And then when they give up that habit, suddenly all the health unlocks and improves. And then this is just a graph of the food intake from 1970 to 2017. What you can see is that Americans are eating pretty much more of everything, right? So as far as the line goes, that line is the dietary recommendations. They are not meeting vegetables, dairy, or fruit. And as far as the whole grain, the USDA says to make half of your grains whole. They're not meeting that. It's like 95% refined white grains. So as far as dairy goes, you saw that dairy is a pretty large share. What has changed from 1977 to 2017? Cheese is the largest category of dairy food. Much fewer people are drinking milk than they used to. I mean, many of us grew up, and you remember your parents used to say, you have to drink 3 glasses a day, and that was 12 ounce or 16 ounce. And that was a main source of nourishment. And that's fine and good if you have very little, if you don't have other sources. It's a source of calories and protein, and then meanwhile, they put vitamin A and D in there because there's no other sources, right? So it's a poverty kind of food. But now cheese is a rich food, and so it has surpassed all the others. Cottage cheese is included, yes.
So that's good for you, right?
So it is not. There's no fiber. It is a lot of fat. And believe it or not, it actually contributes to diabetes. We will go over why. So the question was about cottage cheese being good for you. So we will go over why dairy fat is detrimental to health. So what has changed is, while everything has shifted to richer dairy foods, dairy fat intake has gone way up. So, and as far as vegetables, why are potatoes and tomatoes the largest share? That is ketchup and fries, ketchup and French fries. So interestingly, the school nutrition guidelines were changed to include ketchup and French fries as the vegetable serving in the food guidelines of the schools. Yeah, it is. It is a very scary thing that has happened. So what is lacking in the American diet is not protein, it's fiber. The average intake is 15 grams a day for women and 18 grams per day for men. And the target for the USDA is 20 grams, which is not much. But my target is 40 grams or higher. And the people that do the best are eating 70 grams or higher of fiber. So most people don't get enough. We're talking 95% of Americans don't reach USDA minimum for fiber, as opposed to only 3% of Americans do not meet the minimum for protein. So here's the talk about on TV, protein, but no one talks about fiber. They did in the 1970s and then they stopped. Yes, do you have a question? Thank you. Sure.
Regarding fiber, I know that there is such a lack for all of us. I know this might be a difficult question, but could you recommend a couple of things that would contribute to fiber, and how much quantity would be reasonable?
Sure. Yeah, we will talk about that in more depth, but just to state briefly what foods have fiber and how much quantity is reasonable. So the foods that contain fiber are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lentils and beans, and nuts and seeds. And in the end, no matter how you divide it, it's going to be healthy. But generally speaking, if you divide it up into, let's say, a third of the plate is vegetable, maybe a third is lentils and beans, and a third of the plate is a whole grain, right? We're talking maybe a 10-inch plate or even 12-inch plate. The calorie density is very low, so that even if you consume, let's say, 4 pounds a day of that food, you're still meeting the calories. Whereas if you consume 4 pounds a day of chicken and cottage cheese and white bread, right, that the calories are much higher in 4 pounds of processed food, meat and dairy. Yes?
Is there such a thing as negative calories?
So there is the thought, as far as negative calories, there is the thought that if you eat a lot of foods that have a lot of water and fiber content, that the energy to digest is more. But people don't consume those things. So for example, I would call celery and cucumbers negative fiber foods. So fiber is linked to increased satiety, meaning satisfaction with your meal, so that it controls hunger and reduced incidence of diabetes. And fiber is only found in plant foods. So this is the magic explanation we'll spend a little time on of why things like dairy fat and cheese and animal fats are not healthy. So there is something called intramyocellular lipid. That means inside the muscle cell fat. That's what exactly that means. So it serves as a source of energy during exercise. And, you know, someone doesn't need much, in addition to glycogen, which is sugar stores. So the content decreases during prolonged submaximal exercise, which means just below the point of exhaustion, right? That kind of exercise that someone would do before the point of exhaustion. It's increased in the trained athlete state, right? To match the capacity to oxidize fat and serving as a readily available fuel. So that's intramyocellular lipid. And skeletal muscle stores fat if the availability of fatty acids is high. So typical American diet is 40 to 50% fat, believe it or not. The goal for a plant-based diet is 10 to 20% fat. So that's considered low-fat diet by American Heart Association. Actually, low-fat diet by Heart Association standards is 30% fat. very low-fat diet by Heart Association standards is 20% fat or less. So what we recommend with whole food plant-based diet is equal to a very low-fat diet by the American Heart Association standards. So what happens is, do you see that as far as the insulin signaling, insulin is like a key that opens up the channels and signals the glucose transporters to bring in glucose into the cell. And when there's a lot of fat inside the muscle cell, the mechanism can't do it as efficiently. So that's why, for example, we'll go over it in a few slides more, is bariatric surgery, which is laparoscopic gastric bypass surgery, bypasses fat absorption. And if someone with that surgery eats a bunch of fat, what happens? Anyone know what happens? If someone with bariatric surgery of gastric bypass, what happens is it comes out the other end because they're not absorbing it. They can't absorb it. So in effect, that surgery has been shown to cure diabetes by massive weight loss by bypassing the fat absorption, and therefore it cures diabetes. So this is what it looks like under the microscope, that you can see this fat content in muscle cells, and it appears as little fat globules under the microscope. So yes, so we just talked about this. The procedure that was used to reverse diabetes is the laparoscopic gastric bypass. And previously it was called gastric bypass. I remember seeing someone that was cut from the sternum all the way down, opened up all the way, and what happens is they rearrange the intestines, shrink the stomach to smaller than the fist. And so this is what the surgery looks like. Everything's been rearranged, and it's bypassed. The part of the intestine that absorbs fat is bypassed. Now, since that's bypassed, also the part of the intestine that absorbs the fat-soluble vitamins is bypassed. Those are vitamins A, D, E, and K. And that's why some people do have severe nutrition deficiencies and side effects. There are some who lose an extreme amount of weight. There are some who regain the weight. And then what happens is they have revision surgery. So don't worry about the details on the slide. This has just shown that medical treatment was very simple when I was in medical school. Now it has become extremely complicated. So these are all the classes of drugs. There are many classes of drugs: sulfonylurea, TZD, DPP-4, SGLT2, GLP-1, and then insulin. A lot of them are extremely expensive, and many times someone ends up on 3 or 4 diabetes treatments in a desperate way to cure it. Not cure, but control it, let's say. So, and then as far as insulin treatment has also become very complicated. Whereas before it was NPH and regular insulin, now we have all different types of long-acting. We have all different types of short-acting. Then we have mixtures. Mixtures can be 70%, 30%, 50%, and it becomes very complicated. So this is just the algorithm that I just wanted to illustrate. Yes?
How does a doctor decide what combination of medicine to use?
So actually, that's a good question. How does a doctor decide what combination of medicine to use? So it's by the guidelines. The guidelines are updated every year. So American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, American College of Endocrinology, American Diabetes Association. These are all diabetes groups. And then the UK has their own groups. They get together, they have meetings, they convene every year, and they decide, they research the latest and greatest drugs, and they together decide how you should approach it, which you should start first, which you should start second, what drugs should be used with what drugs. And then as far as insulin, every time there's a new insulin, it's added to the guideline as an option. Generally speaking, someone with type 2 diabetes may start long-acting insulin only, for example, maybe once at night, right? And then if they're not controlled, maybe they may have the short-acting insulin with each meal. And the nice thing about today's insulin is that the mealtime insulin can be taken with the first bite of food. Used to be someone used to take insulin and then wait half hour to eat. Now it's pretty immediate. So then here's a question is, how far back does the plant-based approach go in the medical literature? It actually goes back to the 1940s that it was used. So these are the early pioneers. So Walter Kempner program started in 1939. It was called, the article is called Effective Rice Diet on Diabetes Mellitus Associated with Vascular Disease. And then further on, Nathan Pritikin was someone famous who wrote a series of articles. Now, Nathan Pritikin was an engineer. He had certain patents. He had the wealth to afford to test himself every week. And he was able to reverse his angina, his heart disease. And his article was published. So anyone can publish an article in a medical journal. You don't have to be a medical doctor. He just had extraordinary insight and knowledge. And in 1974, he published his first book. And further on, he published articles in medical research journals. I believe there were somewhere between 5 to 10 articles. He's still up there. If someone wants to search pubmed.gov, which is the database, you can find Nathan Pritikin's article still there and referenced. So just look at what the title is. Long-term use of a high complex carbohydrate, high fiber, low fat diet and exercise in the treatment of non-insulin dependent diabetes patients. This was published in 1983. And you know what, if you lived in California, you may remember packages of food that had the label Pritikin. Anyone remember those? So I remember pasta that was very grainy, very fibrous. What do you remember? Right. Right. So you remember not liking the Pritikin diet, yeah. And the reason people didn't like the Pritikin diet, it was kind of flavorless. And actually, very interestingly, the flavorless style of eating was pioneered way back in the 1800s with Mr. Graham, who created Graham. Before the graham cracker, there was Graham bread, which didn't have the cinnamon and sugar. It was meant to be very plain and, Spartan. But yeah, the Pritikin diet is kind of based on that. It's too bad he didn't connect with some of us Asians back in 1974. That's around when my parents came to the U.S. So here's further more recent research. Neil Barnard, 2006. This was published in an American Diabetes Association journal. A low-fat vegan diet improves glycemic control and cardiovascular risk factors, and a randomized clinical trial in individuals with type 2 diabetes. Now, just to tell you the effectiveness of it, it was double as effective as the standard ADA diet. You would think this would be front page news and everyone would know about it. But does anyone remember hearing about this in 2006, right? It was published in Diabetes Association Journal. And then there was this one published in Rotterdam, Netherlands in 2018. And then more recently, Dr. Hanna Kaliova, who works for Physicians Committee, a plant-based meal stimulates incretin and insulin secretion more than an energy and macronutrient matched standard meal in type 2 diabetes. Now, why this article is so important, there's a lot of medical jargon, but just to break it apart, incretin is what these latest diabetes drugs are. They are incretin type drugs. So this is revolutionary. Again, this should have been front page news, but instead all the drugs are front page news. Any guess why the drugs are front page news? The money for the advertising might be, yeah. You know what? PCRM is very successful as a nonprofit, but they don't have the kind of ad money that the other drugs have, and they can't advertise on Super Bowl. So randomized crossover, just to tell you one more thing, randomized crossover means they had one group with the standard ADA diet, one group with the vegan diet, and then they crossed them over. So that's the most amazing type of clinical study. So just to show you the guidelines, these are the kind of guidelines that doctors get together and write. Believe it or not, in 2019, American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists and American College of Endocrinology together stated very clearly lifestyle therapy begins with nutrition, counseling, and education. So they actually put this first on the whole algorithm for diabetes. And it says all patients should strive to attain and maintain an optimal weight through a primarily plant-based meal plan high in polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fatty acids with limited intake of saturated fatty acids and avoidance of trans fats. So this is what we talked about, intramyocellular lipid. This is the year when science caught up with the endocrinologists after so many years of showing that this worked. After so many, in 1974, Nathan Pritikin. But even in 2019, did anyone hear about the big change to the guidelines? No, not really. No, it was not advertised much. And guess who else did not hear about it? Most physicians. I actually gave very similar talk to this at, let's say, a very major medical center near Chicago. And while, let's say, the majority of the audience was receptive and happy, there's always the one physician who was unhappy. And he said, you know, how dare you talk about lifestyle because that is observational. Drugs are placebo-controlled trials. You should only talk about drugs. So that happens. That's okay. You know what? It happens. But I thanked him. I said, thank you for being honest and speaking up, because otherwise, if someone doesn't say something, I don't know how the audience received it. So this is the official guideline from the American Diabetes Association. This was published in 2017. It says, healthful eating patterns containing nutrient-dense, high-quality foods. And it says Mediterranean, DASH, and plant-based diets are examples of healthful eating patterns. What's in common with these three eating patterns? They're predominantly plant-based. So the American Diabetes Association published this guideline, this official guideline. So does anyone remember hearing about this in 2017? No. So it takes many years, often 20 to 30 years, before a published guideline becomes mainstream in the medical world. So I would say if you have a physician right now, or a nutritionist or a diabetic educator, what you want to do, you don't want to send them articles from some other group or a YouTube video. No, you want to pull the information straight from their own guidelines. Even the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, believe it or not, has a plant-based section with lots of great printouts and articles on children and adult nutrition from plant-based diets. They actually have officially endorsed plant-based diets in their guidelines. This was over 10 years ago, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So any dietitian who says just eat a bunch of chicken and fish, they're misguided. So I have to say, if you want to make change, you have to use bold words. So the way to say it, I would say, be bold. Say, guess what, doctor or nutritionist so-and-so, do you know about these guidelines and why aren't you following them? Because they were published a while ago. So this is from a journal article in the Journal of Family Practice, my specialty, published, which diet is best. So they actually, on the right, they show the effectiveness, low glycemic index, which people do carb counting, right? Reduction in A1C of 0.4 to 0.5, Mediterranean, reduction in A1C up to 0.6, and then vegetarian, which is plant-based, focusing on fruits and vegetables and foods low in saturated fat. 1.2 reduction in A1C. That's as good as some of these modern drugs. This article was published some time ago. So just to give you an idea of how to put them together in some resources, so you can write them down or take a photo. So one is Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, who did this study, pcrm.org/diabetes. The resources are in English, in Hindi, in Spanish, and Chinese. So they want to cater to the whole world. Full plate living, a doable approach for better health, that's what they say. That is officially endorsed by the company I work for. It's published on their website for the employees. So these are some tips, very simply. Eat a plant-based diet, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lentils, and beans primarily. Limit added fats, which are oil and animal products. But I would add for most people, they should also limit nuts and seeds to, let's say, maybe 1 or 2 handfuls, because someone can eat too much if they have weight to lose. And then eat on the lower glycemic scale. So we're not saying low carb, we're saying lower glycemic. Beans have carbs, but they don't raise the sugar as much. So beans, whole grains such as oats, sweet potatoes, squash, berries, and lentils. So these foods are lower on the glycemic scale. And then aim for 40 grams of fiber or more per day. These are the simple guidelines. So the nice thing about these guidelines, people are much more likely to follow them because suddenly they don't have to watch every portion. They don't have to measure out half a cup of this, 1/4 cup of that amongst these foods. The only food that you do have to kind of measure is the nuts and seeds. And still, the allowance is generous. So we went over this in our talks, and I keep bringing this up because it's so important and critical to understand this, that a plant-based diet is nutritionally adequate, not only adequate, but I would say superior. So if you look carefully at the chart, there's no cholesterol in plant foods. The fat content is much lower. The protein content is roughly equal, and if someone wants to round it out, they can buy unsweetened soy milk or make unsweetened yogurt and round out the protein content. Or you can use things like textured vegetable protein, which has 0 carbohydrates. Soy curls, 0 carbohydrates. So the nice thing is you can add protein without adding carbohydrates to your meal. And then you have all the dietary fiber. This is only in 500 calories of energy of a food example. 31 grams, which is more than most Americans eat. Vitamin C is there. You know, you've probably heard of scurvy, right? And then iron is actually much higher. Now, a caveat is the iron is less well absorbed, but you are giving much more iron. So just to give you an example, this is just me. I don't want to say I'm the example, but I've been able to give blood every 2 months, and my hemoglobin has gone up, which is interesting. But part of that is high-intensity exercise. I found high-intensity exercise is an amazing way to raise iron. Why? Because when you start high-intensity exercise, your body makes more blood cells to compensate. It's amazing. It's perfectly matched. Beta carotene is much higher. Vitamin E is much higher. So all the vitamins that you see on the grocery store shelves in the pharmacy section are in the plant foods. And we're just talking 500 calories, which is 1 meal. Generally speaking, if someone's trying to lose weight and they eat 400 to 500 calories per meal and they eat 3 meals a day and avoid snacking for the most part unless it's like carrots or celery, they can meet their goals of weight loss and reversal of diabetes. Folic acid is something of concern, but it need not be of concern if someone is consuming whole food plant-based diet. In fact, if you research prenatal supplements that are made for whole food plant-based eaters, they don't contain folic acid, or they contain very little. compared to the average. So folic acid today is put into bread because many Americans, they would just eat bread and other salami and no vegetables. Folic acid comes from the word foliage, which is plant food. And then magnesium. How many people do you know who take magnesium every day? Right? They use it for, it's a vitamin, calcium and magnesium, right? But here I showed you calcium is there and magnesium is there. Over 500 milligrams calcium, over 500 milligrams magnesium. CalMag that you buy on the shelf is about that much, calcium, magnesium. So these are nutrients that are not tracked by USDA. There is no USDA recommended daily reference intake for phytochemicals. Most Americans are highly deficient in these phytochemicals. We are just now discovering the function of them. They are vital. They may be vital for prevention of cancer and cardiovascular disease, and they're just beginning to be researched and understood. We are talking thousands. So an apple may look simple, and vitamin C content is not that high in an apple, but these phytochemicals are loaded in that apple, and the peel of the apple for that matter. So that's why the phytochemicals are part of the reason why someone can eat a whole fruit like an apple and not raise their sugar as much as a glass of apple juice, for example, because the whole food has many nutrients in there. And then I won't go over all of them because we did in the previous presentation on cancer, but just one in particular, isoflavones, soy. So we talked about how they're cancer preventive, but also in the list, lowers type 2 diabetes risk. So that's why I would suggest to anyone who's on a diabetes diet that to round out the protein to get soy isoflavones and to have something low glycemic. Unsweetened soy milk works great. Unsweetened soy milk yogurt works great. It can be made at home with a probiotic capsule, believe it or not. It just takes some time. But here we have lowering type 2 diabetes risk, lowering cancer risk, and helping menopause symptoms. There's too many benefits not to have it. So this is just one example, and this is on YouTube. It is a fascinating story to watch. So you can go to YouTube and look up Eric O'Grey. He was depressed. He visited his physician. His physician's advice, buy a burial plot because you won't live too much longer. Literally, that was the advice. So he got so frustrated, even more depressed. He was lonely. So he sought out a naturopathic doctor who treats with diet and lifestyle, right? And the naturopathic doctor made a very unique recommendation. You go rescue a dog and you start walking every day and you follow a plant-based diet. So that's him, marathon runner, you know. So, and again, you may say, well, he has arthritis. Well, guess what? The arthritis is able to be managed with weight loss and exercise. If you even just look at those legs, they are full of muscles. So the muscles support the joints. So guess what? His medications were $1,000 a month, and that was a long time ago. Currently, they would probably be $2,000 per month. So just know that it is so important for healthcare professionals to know. This was a proclamation issued by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So next month, we will celebrate a different kind of proclamation, right? The Declaration of Independence, Independence Day, right? If anyone's read that, you will be amazed. I would suggest everyone, July 4th, read the Declaration of Independence and make sure your families read it. It's so vital, right? That we celebrate that day of fighting for independence and winning, but we also celebrate our independence, our freedoms, right? So just know the American College of Lifestyle Medicine put together a statement about your healthcare freedom, your freedom to know that diabetes is reversible. Again, not 100%, but in many cases it is. So this just summarizes all of the problems of diabetes many of which we talked about. Part of it is $237 billion in direct medical costs per year, 43% due to diabetes medications. So do you see how it's gone up? And then this is the Bill of Rights. You have the right to be fully informed. You have the right to be given unbiased, accurate information. You have the right to know the full effects of all medications, all the side effects. You have the right to know that certain foods can increase your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. You have the right to have your medications reduced or eliminated if you undergo lifestyle therapies that successfully treat the underlying cause, right? We can just put some Band-Aid on a festering wound, or we can treat the wound underneath. So these are your rights. You have the right to know that it's reversible. You have the right to know how to reverse. Now you may say, well, my doctor doesn't know any of that. Well, guess what? They can go to lifestylemedicine.org. They can take continuing education. We are required as physicians to do 50 hours every year of continuing education. I have to track it and submit it, and once in a while the state of Illinois audits us. And then we have to gather all those certificates and submit them. So, and many of us get expenses paid for our education through our corporations that we work for. And if we work for ourselves, we get to expense those with the IRS as business expense. So there is absolutely no excuse for a professional not to know. Whether it's a physician, registered dietitian, endocrinologist, cardiologist, no matter what, they all should know, because diabetes is treated as a team. If you have an ophthalmologist, guess what? You can copy that retina journal showing reversal of retinopathy with plant-based diet 50 years ago. So you just have to hold their feet to the fire, right, so to speak. And
They will eventually.
hopefully they will, hopefully. You know, so far not so much. So far not so much. It's just so quick to see the patient for 3 minutes. And that's what that doctor told me that stood up at that healthcare system close to Chicago. He stood up and said, you know what, this takes time. I said, yes, it takes at least 30 to 40 minutes of time, but you're saving a life. You're helping someone. He said, it's so easy. It takes 3 minutes to just hit send on all the prescriptions, to view their vitals, put a stethoscope on and send them on their way. And it's true, you can make much more money seeing 5 patients per hour doing that automated style of care and just referring them to an endocrine, referring them to dietitian. Who here has experienced that type of medical visit? Literally 5 to 10 minutes in and out without much explanation, right? Yes, some of you have, yeah. So, yeah, this is the Diabetes Bill of Rights. You have the right to all these things that I mentioned. And then, you know, this is the last part. We're almost done. What is remission? So remission has an exact definition that has been published in the research literature. So we are talking about below the target. The target may be 6.5 that you have heard of, right? So 6.5, maybe 7, maybe for some 7.5. We are talking below. So partial remission is hyperglycemia that is in the range of borderline diabetes. Below 6.5 and 5.8 or above, okay? Fasting glucose 100 to 125. Fasting glucose 126 qualifies as diabetes. So partial remission is that. Complete remission is return of totally normal. We're talking 5.7 or below. Fasting glucose under 100. Now, I have seen this complete remission in people who've had bariatric surgery. I have seen it with people that are on those fancy drugs that are injectable. And I have seen it with plant-based diet. You can have many ways of achieving it. One of those ways helps overall health and is much cheaper. So just to show you, look, this is right on the website, free webinar, Dr. Kelly and Dr. Carlson. Dr. Kelly started this college of lifestyle medicine at Loma Linda University in the early 2000s. He's been doing this for a long time. He is one of the founding members. So it goes way back. But guess what? He has shared this webinar free of charge, 1 hour long webinar. Why not watch it? So there are 2 types of continuing medical education. One type is where you answer a quiz and get credit. One type is where you can do an educational activity, not necessarily answer a quiz, and get a certificate. This can be the type 2 type of activity. And they offer a full course that's maybe it's somewhere between 6 and 10 hours on how exactly to reverse diabetes, step by step. So what's the excuse? There's no excuse. And if someone goes to Nutrition CME, which is a physician's committee website, they can view all those courses absolutely free. There is even an app. If someone doesn't have time to do all this, they can load the app up, and the app will show them a summary of just a little summary, how to approach different diseases, how to treat with diet. So thank you, everyone, and we can take some questions. Thank you for asking the ones. Oh, the app, it's called Nutrition Guide for Clinicians. So if you go to the App Store, anyone can download. Just look up Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, and the author will be Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I would encourage you, all of you, to download it, because when you're at the doctor's office, you can show them, hey, doc, download this app, and I hope it will be helpful. It literally takes 10 seconds to tell them. And you want to challenge them. See, doctors have an ego. The ego is they think they know everything. And when they realize they don't know something, maybe it'll prompt them to learn, right? So
say that one more time.
So Nutrition Guide for Clinicians is the name of the app. If you go to the App Store on either Google or Apple, you will find it. Absolutely important. And Nutrition CME is the website for free continuing education. Even for credit, doctors, dietitians, anyone with a master's degree in healthcare, nursing, doesn't matter who, we all need continuing education credits. If you know any physical therapists, I know a physical therapist who is interested in this. So, and believe it or not, PT and OT can have a role in diabetes with respect to rehabilitation, joint pain, fitness, motivation. So, ideally, we'd have a clinic that employs all of these specialists under one roof. The problem is we haven't figured out how to bill for it. On the other hand, guess who has figured out how to bill for thousands of dollars per month? Pharmaceutical companies, right? Like, there's no question. Your insurance sends a check, pays for whatever we prescribe. Maybe they have us authorize it. But when it comes to diabetes, we say the patient needs it, it gets approved. But guess what? There's an out-of-pocket cost for a lot of people. So many people have deductibles that are in the thousands, or they have to pay 20 or 30%. So even though it might be someone else paying, you may end up paying eventually. Yes, you go ahead. Yeah.
Is there anything involving with that, what you're talking, everything about medicine and that sickness connected with old age?
With old age? So old age is just what you make it, right?
But I all life, work,
Yeah.
never have any diabetes.
Yeah,
Now when I come be 85,
right.
I have any that.
So believe it or not, I have seen amazing changes in health. So the question was about old age and whether diabetes is inevitable. So just to give an example, I know one lady who is 65 years old. She was overweight. She started walking 5 miles a day, no matter what the weather. She bought shoes and jackets and clothes, no matter what. She would go outside, and she didn't start 5 miles a day. She started a little bit. And there's an old saying of Hippocrates, walking is man's best medicine. So does anyone have an estimate of the distance someone could walk in the 1800s, before there were all these trolleys and trains and taxis and all that? So believe it or not, the distance would typically be 15 to 20 miles per day, right? So all these years of human beings walking. So you wanted to visit someone at home, you couldn't call them. You just walked 3 or 4 hours until you got to their home, knocked on the door, and hoped they were home. Right? So that's what I would say is, yes, it is not easy to reverse diabetes with older age, but it is possible. It just takes very big efforts. And yes, I know there are people with bad joints and bad back and difficulties, but that's why a team approach is necessary. Like I said, ideally, in my perfect world, we would have rehabilitation specialists working with us side by side, and all the costs would be covered. Because we just showed what are the costs of diabetes. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Wouldn't it be nice to just spend a fraction of that and actually help people to reverse diabetes? Yeah. Yes.
You know, life is hard.
Yes, life is hard,
You
yes.
really have to work at it and be strong.
Yes, of course.
Is there any age at which I can stop worrying about doing the right thing and eating whatever I want?
Is there any age where you can stop worrying about doing the right thing, eating what you want?
I'll make it to 100.
Right, right. So actually, what I want you to do on this subject, yeah, if someone's hospice, but you know, they can stop terminal illness, right? But I would say, besides that, if you watch this movie, series of 4 movies on Netflix called Blue Zones, you will see how these Italian nonnas and these Greek grandmothers, they're still walking up the slope in their village, because in this island, the longest lived people live on a slope. And just to walk to the store and back, just to walk to their relative's house and back, they have to climb a very steep slope. Anyone been to San Francisco? So if you have been to San Francisco, you may have seen the crooked street, you may have seen the degree of the slopes to get from the coast up to the city. It is shocking, and it's leg-breaking, it is. But you know what? I saw some of the healthiest elderly people in San Francisco I have ever seen, and they must be walking a lot. And the weather's kind of nice also. The Golden Gate itself is a goal to get across, right? So, Colorado. So if you look at the map that I showed earlier, you can see some of these patterns that are there. And within California, there's many regions, and people have different levels of health. So does anyone know the region in the United States that's considered the blue zone, where people have the longest span of life in the whole United States? Loma Linda, California, right? So Loma Linda, California, so it is considered, because that is a big population settlement of Seventh-day Adventists who have in their health reform principles built in. So, you know, I'm doing a little bit of listening to Adventist history, and very interestingly, the first reformer for health was not William Kellogg, like everyone thinks. So he got the ideas. It was Mr. Captain Bates, right? Captain Bates. He was the first. He just had the idea on his ships. He banned drinking. And people thought, oh my goodness, there's going to be a mutiny. You have to allow them to drink. And then he banned tobacco. And then he gave up meat himself. He just had the intuition. Now that idea, you may say, you know what, that's kind of a newfangled idea for the 1800s. But can you believe it goes way back even further, thousands of years? Anyone remember in the Bible book, there's a story of amazing healing, and it's actually done as a clinical trial. There were a group of the faithful, and there were others who decided not to follow plant-based diet. Anyone remember which book it is?
Daniel.
The book of Daniel. Yeah, it's only a very short passage. But if you read between the lines, that passage tells you so much. Just like Neil Barnard, it was like an inadvertent clinical study of plant-based diet, right? So,
I think there's a Daniel diet.
so Daniel diet, if you Google Daniel diet, you will see many, many printouts and PDFs available with a whole plan, which is generally 21 to 30 days, usually 30 days. And it includes daily prayers, it includes daily recommendations. And it's even more whole food plant-based than typical diet we recommend, in that generally you try to avoid any refined foods. So it's the closest to a whole food diet. So let's say, you know, when I started this, it was in 2012. I only intended to try it for 30 days. So this is the thing. Anyone can commit to 1 month or 21 days. 1 month or so it takes to form a habit, somewhere between 21 and 45 days, right? So what happened is I committed to 30 days and I felt amazing. I felt so much energy. This was when I was turning 40. Then I said, okay, you know what? This is great. I'm going to do it for 3 months. And for those 3 months, I'll start at the gym and exercise too. Then after 3 months, I got my labs done and they looked so much better. My blood pressure had gone way down. And I said, why stop at 3 months? And now it's been over 10 years, right? So just think, a little seed is sometimes what it takes to start a habit. And there is a book called Atomic Habits. Anyone heard of that book? So you can actually go to YouTube and view a summary of that book, Atomic Habits. So the idea is to make everything into a habit, and you have to kind of surround yourself with an environment that's conducive to that, which is what we're creating at Salient Lifestyle Center. So, for example, it is called Satura. It's an online gathering with support now from one of our board members who's a registered dietitian who answers questions. She will be here tomorrow, okay? Oh, and Julia will be here in this church tomorrow, right? And can you tell us a little bit about, yeah, if you want to come up and, yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia. I'm a chef. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Hello everyone. I'm a chef. I am a dietetic student, so I'm going to be a registered dietitian. We have 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗶𝗶, who is a registered dietitian on the team. We have, you know, inspirational Dr. Garg, and I will be your basically how-to guide. Like, how do I put more plants on my plate? How do I eat more fiber? How do I reduce oils? How do I, store the beans in my pantry? So I will be your basically all the skills, everything, how to do this guide. So we are all set with Dr. Garg, 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗶, and I will be your main person of contact.
Great, thank you. Oh, you live close. Perfect. That's great. That's great. So, yeah, that's what we want to do, is we want to make it easy. We have videos recorded already. If you go to YouTube, search Salient Lifestyle Center, and you click on live, you will see some of those recordings. And definitely bookmark that. Yes?
Well, 2 questions. That diet you were talking that you run, that was just basic plant-based diet?
You know what I did? I'll tell you exactly what I did. I went to PCRM's website, pcrm.org, and I searched 21-Day Kickstart. So 21-Day Kickstart is an app that is available on the App Store. You just go to the App Store, search 21-Day Kickstart, and you know what? They don't always give the support because they're not always available, but for the most part, they will give support during those 21 days and give you meal plans. As in, sometimes it's hard to know what to cook. They tell you exactly what to cook, how to buy it for 3 weeks. And I think it's a great start. Now, it may not be perfectly whole food plant-based. There may be a little bit of maple syrup here and there, but it's meant to be a transition diet to start out. Thank you.
21-Day Kickstart.
21-Day Kickstart Physicians Committee will be the publisher.
And then, before I forget, I'm sorry, but you were bringing up oils to get away from oils.
Right.
That doesn't include like olive oil.
So actually it would include olive oil, and the reason is we talked about that intramyocellular lipid. So this is what I would suggest with olive oil, is that olive oil should be used very sparingly, not in the cooking process. So let's say you're sauteing onions, which you'll show how, so you saute them without oil. Believe it or not, you put them in the pan, heat the pan up to medium, they will start sizzling. You just put maybe a sprinkle of salt on them. And then you can add a little water so that it doesn't stick to the pan. And then after everything's prepared and cooked, if someone wants to use, let's say, 1/4 of a teaspoon or a little drizzle, just for flavor, it's actually a healthier way to use olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil that's high quality is very good, but it is usually used in excess. And when someone is starting it, we generally recommend not to use oil just to get familiar with it.
I use a lot, and I'll be honest with you, I use maybe a 1/4 cup or so, 1/2 cup, and sometimes on a big salad.
Oh, yeah. So actually, that is so interesting. You use a 1/4 cup or 1/2 cup on a big salad.
'Cause I went from the salad dressing
Yeah.
to the olive oil.
To the olive oil, right. So I just want to talk about the caloric content of oil. 1/4 cup of oil has how many calories? So I'm going to do multiple choice. 100, 250, or 500. Anyone can guess? Believe it or not, 500 calories are in 1/4 cup of oil, which is a lot. So let's say someone is making salad. You know what? It's okay to use a touch of olive oil. It tastes delicious. But the quantities can be, for example, balsamic vinegar. Pretty much how much you want. And then you just sprinkle just a little dash of oil on top of the salad just for the flavor. Now another way to get the same flavor, you chop up some olives, you put it in your salad. Olives are 90% fat, but they're much lower in calories. So that's another way. And then gives you the fat and satisfaction. Little bit of walnuts sprinkled on the salad also gives you the fat. So it's all about budgeting, right? If you're going to budget the fat, it's better to budget it with olives and walnuts.
So you're saying oils mainly because the calories to get away from?
So not just the calories, but that mechanism of diabetes, intramyocellular lipid. So the calories, again, if someone needs to gain a little weight, they can use a little more oil. Like say they're body mass index 16, like one of my sons. So we do give him every now and then some olive oil with white bread because he is way too skinny. He eats all the fruits, all the vegetables, but he also walks 18,000 steps per day. So it is hard to obtain what you need. So oil was originally meant for extra calories after someone ate. So if someone was walking 20 miles per day back in 1850, how many calories would they need? They would need a lot extra. It is shocking. So that's why a lot of the rich foods came about, because you needed calories just to sustain your weight. And back then, people died from lack of calories. And just think, tuberculosis, pneumonia, diphtheria, even malaria. Someone would get sick for weeks and weeks. There was no antibiotic. And so a little bit of reserve was considered a good thing. But they didn't have that reserve because they were poor, first of all. They couldn't afford rich foods. But yeah, very interesting fact about fat calories. Does anyone know who invented peanut butter? Not William, sorry. John Kellogg, yeah. John Kellogg invented peanut butter. And it was because of guests at his sanitarium, he called it, sanitarium, which was a place of healing in Battle Creek. And he also invented granola and then dry cereals, flaking process. Very interesting. Yes. Yes. So same story I would give, that the quantity used is way too much. So in India, a lot of people use mustard seed oil and other oils for flavor. It can be used for flavor. Chili oil, for example, sesame oil, for example, right? And the quantity used for flavor is literally you may dip a spoon halfway and then you drip it on. That's the amount used. So we're talking literally like a fraction of a teaspoon of it. That's what's needed. But if you add it at the very end of cooking and just use it that way for flavor, that's fine. It is hard for people to do that because we call it a slippery slope. So we generally recommend no oil. So, but it's worth trying. When I started mostly raw and no oil.
I watched the 𝗶𝗍, the girls, the sisters, they always said canola oil. They use canola oil, all those recipes they have. And then later they said, no canola oil, only olive oil. And they said, no, really said, yeah.
Yeah, so people evolve their recommendations based on new knowledge. So you were talking about, is it Three Sisters? Did you? Yeah.
Mitchell sisters, sisters from 3ABN.
3ABN Network. Okay, 3ABN Network.
Books, they have everything.
Okay.
But they always use the canola oil.
So 3ABN Network recommended canola oil initially, then olive oil, and now very little of the oil. So the latest is the greatest. So, in fact, the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists some years ago said that whole food plant-based is the way to go. They made an official statement. And this health reform part of the Adventist Church goes way back, to the days of the sanitariums. Yeah. Yes.
Also, was advertising really diabetic, and he died.
Who was it?
Recently.
Oh, Hans Deal. Okay, Hans Deal, I met him. He was older. He passed away from stroke or a heart problem. Anyway, people get sick and die. We know that. Everyone will meet their maker one day, right? However, all we can do is do the best that we can and hope for the best. Pray that we're going to be okay. Right. There are some people who die young. I know. I have a colleague, medical colleague. She passed away from stage 4 pancreas cancer at age 53. Another colleague, very healthy, living in San Francisco, passed away from sudden blood clot, pulmonary embolus, it's called. So yes, things happen. All we can say is, on the whole, people live longer on this lifestyle. And we say lifestyle because it's not just about diet. It's about fitness and movement and, emotional health and social health, those things. Yes.
3ABN does not recommend canola oil. The cooking show with the Mitchells sisters, they're on 3ABN. They have a show on 3ABN. But
Okay.
3ABN,
Yeah, so the bottom line is there are differences, and also people learn as they go as far as health. So one more, yeah.
totally plant-based.
Generally speaking, the mainstream has aligned with American College of Lifestyle Medicine in recommending a whole plant food diet for the majority of people. Yes. And yes.
I asked you about, because maple syrup, you mentioned it wasn't that great.
So maple syrup is just fine in small quantities, for example. It's all about the quantity.
Good sweeteners,
So as far as sweeteners, they're all equivalent. As far as you asked about good sweeteners, pretty much they're all equivalent. And as long as it's used sparingly, that's the key. It's probably the healthiest sweetener as far as nutrients goes is date paste. Date paste can be made by mixing dates with water and processing them. Any other questions?
So honey would be what, too much calories or a little bit of
So again, it's all about the quantity. If someone's drizzling a little,
healthier than others, right? That's
so not necessarily. Honey is very high in fructose. Agave is very high in fructose. So no matter what, it's all calories. And generally speaking, these sweeteners raise the blood sugar. So when we talk about diabetes, they are to be avoided because they raise blood sugar and don't have fiber, whether it's honey, agave, or any other. So generally, whole fruits can be used to sweeten things, and they are better. Dates, again, it's easy to overeat dates. So a little bit of date paste is probably healthier because there's some fiber in there. And there's nutrients, there's a lot of potassium.
that would be the same.
So watermelon is very healthy, but in small quantities with someone who's trying to heal diabetes. For example, if they chop up watermelon and put it into a salad, that's a good use of watermelon, right? But if someone were to eat half a watermelon, I can guarantee it'll raise the blood sugar in someone with diabetes. because of fiber. Now, on the other hand, let's say they reach that stage we talked about and they reverse diabetes. They would be able to eat a whole plate of fruits without raising the blood sugar. So that is someone, his name is 𝗫𝗏𝗂𝗃𝗏𝗂, K-H-A-M-B-A-T-A, on mastering diabetes. Okay, and we'll conclude this, but I'd love to hear your other questions. Thank you again, everyone.